Tak jo, posaďme se na to. Horace, can you sit down?
Yes.
Andrew? In the middle? Perfect. Hello. Máme kameru?
Máme kameru.
Nemohl by to prosím vás někdo nahrát na iPhone? Můžeš začít. Our starts are always complicated. The starts, we always problem to start. I mean, Peter is trained. It's a 90-part one, and still it's not so good. But
Okay, let me start. Dobrý den, dámy a pánové. Vítáme vás u 93. digitu. Zde vás Petr Mára.
Honza Březina, ahoj.
Ahoy, and our special guest star, Horace Dediu. We would like to talk with Horace about Apple and the future of Apple as company. And I had discussion with Horace the other day about Apple and Microsoft and other companies and the future. And Horace told me that Apple is a little bit different because of the DNA of the company. Could you say that again to the audience? Because I think it was really powerful, and I think you can explain why Apple will survive, probably.
Okay, thanks. Well, I think this is not my idea, but it's something that my professor Christensen, Clayton Christensen, came up with. And he said really all companies, even all institutions, are really composed of three things. Resources, or things which are owned, processes, which are methods by which those resources are made to work, and priorities, or sometimes called values, or the reasons why these processes and resources are put to work. So the question is what, how, and why. These are the three things that define any entity made by humans. So the question for a big company is it really very focused in its resources, its processes, or its priorities? And when you buy or you invest or you think about or analyze a company, you have to think about each of these three areas. And some companies, because of their business model, are very clearly process-oriented. Let's say Microsoft, in my opinion, because Microsoft is very good at getting things done, essentially shipping software. And they're proud of that, and they tell you that. Other companies, like consulting companies, will be very good at their resources, because really the more people they have, the more business they get, the more money they make. So, for example, I think IBM is a resource-heavy company. I was at Nokia, and I think Nokia is very much like Microsoft, which probably what explains a lot of why they get along now. But the idea was very process-oriented. Great process companies are wonderful because it means that even if the people change, the company goes forward. But the last part, right, this why and the priorities or the values of a company are very difficult to pin down. It's very hard to understand why a company does what it does. And I think Apple is somewhat unique in that it is a company that is very careful about understanding the why. In its own mind, I mean, it tries to figure out why do they do certain things. And that set of priorities, I think, is a very, what I use is the word Jobsian. It's what Steve Jobs taught Apple. It's think about the why. And if he did a good job, and we don't know if it's true or not, but my hope is that he embedded the thinking in everyone at Apple to think about why and make sure that you understand the priorities. And if he was successful, then I think the company has a long and prosperous future because it's going to work on its resources and processes because it knows why. And that is actually, in contrast, many companies don't know this question. They never even examine it. They don't understand the priorities. And they just go around all the time using resources and applying them with processes and not ever caring why. Well, usually it's like we want to make money or this is our market. These aren't good enough answers. It really, you know, when the Jobsian mentality is like you have to put a dent in the universe, you really want to be there because you're going to change the world. That sort of thing is, I think, very motivational, very powerful, and comes through all the way through their products. And that's why there's so much passion around the company.
Yeah. Maybe we can compare it, for example, with the HP, because they start in the garage like Apple. They have a strong founders like Apple, but then they change to stock-owned company. And,
exactly, great example, because HP used to have something called the HP way. Even IBM had its founder imprinted on the company, a way of doing things in a priority system. But too often, these things get corroded, eroded, and they just, entropy catches up with you, right? It's a force of nature, entropy, that things go to crap over time, right? So the question for Apple really is, can the management there preserve what was given to them? And in the sense of, there's another great iconic company, I think, that had the same dilemma, which was Disney. Disney had a strong founder that had a great vision, that really drove a great culture. And for many years after Disney died, Walt Disney died, the company was meandering, was failing in many ways. And actually, Steve Jobs referred to them once when telling Tim Cook what to do, and he said, don't let that happen. And the reason it happened at Disney is because everybody was asking themselves, what would Walt do? What would the boss have thought? And he said, whatever you do after I'm gone, don't ask the question, what would Steve do? So really, that's not the point. The point is to do the best you can, follow principles, just have the passion. And so, yeah, there are lots of ways this can go wrong. HP is an example, Disney, although they recovered, IBM and so on. And one would hope that they're really institutionalizing these Jobs ideas. And my hope, and I mentioned this the other night as well, my hope is that through the Apple University, which is one of these weird things that we don't hear much about, but that is, to me, evidence that it exists, is evidence that they've actually thought that we have to put this in writing, we have to capture it, we have to have cases built that teach and reteach to every new resource that comes on board, teach them what this means, what you are inheriting. And they're doing it in a hopefully robust way. I think they're bringing in great teachers from academia to help them. But just the fact that they're putting that effort into it implies to me that they're conscious of the need to preserve that very important thing.
Okay, could you explain to the audience what exactly Apple Academy means? Okay,
it's not a well-known thing, but apparently it leaked on a couple of news sites. One was Fortune, which I think they wrote a story about this when they talked about the Apple organizational structure, and they brought up the fact that the head of HR, human resources at Apple at the time, was a professor who had left the top spot at Yale Business School. Now, head of human resources is a top academic, and so that was a bit of a mystery, and they uncovered that he was heading this Apple University, and that he had been recruited for that, and again, through other sources, we found out that the job of Apple University is to actually teach and to give degrees almost to the employees, management typically, but to teach everybody the Apple way. And firstly, you need to know what it is before you can teach it. Secondly, you need to write it in a way that's a curriculum that is teachable. And then you have to have great teachers to tell the stories. And so we assume that they're doing that. They've hired a lot of people from the best universities in America. Even most recently, I think it was last week or even this week, someone posted that the top professor from Berkeley was hired into Apple to be part of Apple University. And so Yale, some Harvard people, and now Berkeley as well. So they're really putting a lot of effort in this.
And do you think that the Apple could be driven by the team, or there will be another Steve Jobs, like a one person? Because, for example, at the Microsoft, there is the big return of Big Daddy to save the company.
Well, what we saw, I think, with Tim Cook and is that he's not Steve Jobs, and that's not a bad thing. I think Steve Jobs was a brilliant product guy, but maybe the company shouldn't be run always by a product guy. I think many ways Jony Ive now is the product guy, and Tim Cook is really become, he used to be top operational guy, but now he's really trying to be covering everything, and he has his own top operations guy under him. But the classic management theory tells you that the CEO needs to be a general purpose manager. They may have a background in sales or engineering, but they need to really have a general view of the world, and you can't apply the template of engineering to everything. So in that sense, I hope that that it's about the team that's there now, and it always was. I think Steve Jobs relied heavily on Cook and relied heavily on Mansfield, on Eddie Q and others. And now it's the same, almost the same team. Some have changed, but the idea is that it is a team effort, and there are pretty good people working there. Again, if you have the right processes and priorities, actually even the whole team could turn over, and yet the company will still preserve. That's what I meant, by the way, by DNA. The DNA is a combination of all of these, and mostly it's the why stuff that matters, but it's what makes it valuable, and it's what makes it persevere.
Okay, so based on what you said, you believe that Apple will still innovate new products, right? That the innovation is in the DNA.
Well, again, historically, if you go back, and we haven't had a lot of history to deal with in terms of business history. I like to take a long-term perspective, and if you think about the Industrial Revolution is only since 1825. Commerce before then was very different, but industrial economy did not exist. But even if you go back to the earliest times of civilization, even if you thought of agriculture as the beginning of commerce in a way, trading and all that, that's only a few thousand years. As a species, we're millions of years old. So what did we do before commerce? Well, we still sang, we still loved, we still enjoyed life, and so on. And so we can't apply any rules to this very young thing called commerce. But the funny thing is that even if you study the last 100 years or so of what companies who have prospered look like, you see them usually that they had one great idea, and then they worked it out, and then they couldn't come up with another idea. Yep. It's very common that you have this up and down. And unlike some people who suggest that corporations are infinite life or are omnipowerful or omnipotent, sorry, or that are so powerful that they're beyond human. No, I see nothing but a history of corporations being very fragile, very vulnerable, that very few last longer than the average life of a human being. They're much more likely to die before middle age, if you were to consider 40, 50 years. How many companies do we know from, in the tech space at least, that made it for 40 years? We have companies that are not even teenagers and that they're over the hill, right? So in that sense, companies are very, very fragile. They tend to have one good idea and can't follow up. There have been a few serial disruptors, and Sony is a great example. They had a couple of decades. IBM is another great example because IBM is just had its 100th birthday. That was in 2011. Imagine that. They had a huge celebration because one company made it to 100 years. How many people make it to 100 years, right? And there are some companies, by the way, that are a few hundred years old, but they're usually small. They're usually family-owned and do very, very limited things. So no one that gets big tends to last long. It's very fascinating just to study that alone. So in that sense, what Apple is about is an experiment that no one has seen succeed before. That you can create a new thing, be successful with it, and then let it go and make another thing. Yeah. Because by letting go means that you're okay with 20% market share, that you can say, look, you know, if we went to 100% market share, it would change our DNA. We would lose sight of our priorities. So if you are good enough, you are courageous enough to say, well, take this leadership role and we'll be fine with losing it at some point in time. And then the only way we'll survive is if we take another leadership role. And that's what I think is part and parcel of their DNA, is the idea that you innovate and then innovate something else that might even be self-disruptive. And then that is in the disruption framework, in disruption theory, self-disruption is the highest form of art. Yeah. Self-disruption is when you're able to not only disrupt others, not only create new things when none existed, but rather to take a look at yourself and you say, I need to make sure that what I do ends. And in that sense, you know, and there's another great Jobsian phrase which said, death is the greatest thing in life, because it allows something new to be born.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point, because Apple was for decades the computer company. And then Steve changed it and disrupted this history and come with the mobile touchable devices. And a lot of users today is crying for old era and asking what will be with our computers or Macs. Do you think it's necessary to forget for desktop PCs to be the best one in mobiles?
There's a balancing that happens. Obviously, it's not all thrown away. There is a transition. And I think the idea is to make sure that inside of your organization you have people who have incentives to create new things, even if someone taps them on the shoulder and says, you know, what you're doing might be harmful to me. And most of the time when that happens, the person who taps you on the shoulder is a senior person, and you know you get the message to stop it. And the senior person would be the Mac group. They would come to the, in any other company in the world, I think, the Mac group would come to the iPad group and say, well, maybe tone it down a bit. I think it's becoming too good. Or maybe you could take that feature away because it affects us too much. And that's very typical. It's the idea of preservation of the whole, of the value of the whole. And no one, in fact, the management of the Mac group, or let's say the incumbent, is highly incentivized. They're given enormous rewards to kill the new thing. They're patted on the back, given a bonus, a handshake, retirement, everything, as a thank you for destroying innovation. I call it destroying innovation because that's what it turns out, but at the time it looks like they're preserving the business. They're doing everything they can to optimize. Now, the funny thing is this is in big companies, but if you think about small companies or startups, why they are successful, it's because there's no one to tap them on the shoulder. Freedom is not having anything to lose. That's a great phrase if you think about it. And that's why sometimes the disadvantaged end up more successful than the advantage, because they are free to do what they want to do. And many small companies have no choice but to create something new because there's nothing else to lose.
I like the one about the freedom. That's a great phrase. Let's talk about the future. What do you think, based on your data, what the future brings us?
Well, I'm an optimist, and I started as an engineer, and I was very excited to look at the technology many decades ago, and I would think and say, wow, the future is so many great things can happen because we have so much technology and we're not using most of it. I was in the research lab and we were working in, this is, puts a figure on my age a little bit, but it was 1989 or so, and we were looking at search. We were in the research lab working out on search algorithms. And at the time, it wasn't called search, it was called information retrieval. And it was done on computers that ran at super fast speeds of 25 megahertz, which was in comparison to the PC of the day, which was 6 or 8 megahertz. These were enormously powerful, and they cost tens of thousands of dollars. And these were called workstations and ran Unix. And so we were working on these problems, but what was in 1980s, late 80s, which, by the way, we came in late. There were people doing that research on mainframes in the 1960s. And we didn't really know what the purpose of this new type of search would be because the internet didn't exist, you see. But once the internet came around, some smart people figured out that if you use the technology of full-text search and indexing, you could actually index the whole world. And we thought about phone books, you know, as an application because phone books are really thick, and that was that's how much data we thought we could process. So, point being that there's been an exponential, huge growth in the data because of the internet. That's made a bigger impact, I think, on our lives than microcomputers, although they work together. And so the question is from now, looking forward, what are we not yet we haven't implemented? I think there's a lot of research going on in machine learning, still the dream of artificial intelligence. We have things around translation that could be amazing stuff they can do there. Things about awareness, context awareness. I mean, now they call this machine learning. I think it's a more acceptable term than artificial intelligence, which got a bad reputation over the years. But anyway, the point being that machine learning is going to be one of those things that hasn't been applied very much. Siri is an example. Much of Google is an example. Much of Google is really about statistical analysis and not so much, you know, sort of brute force machine learning. But there's a lot more that can be done with heuristics and so on. And so bandwidth is only going to get better. Computing power is going to get bigger and faster and smaller at the same time. And so that would lead to new opportunities. And I think one of the thing that causes a tipping point is usually interface methods. And when we went from keyboard to mouse and keyboard, that was a big change that caused the Windows to explode. It caused the Mac first, but then Windows, and it changed the number of people that could use computers, right? So that caused one revolution, and then we had touch, which is causing another revolution, which is bringing a few more billion people into this users group, and now we have the question of can we get even smarter and better? And I think this wearable, it's going to be called wearable or some kind of this idea of having a watch or glasses or headset or something that's going to be smart. That's again defining the attribute of the device. I think what matters is that it's going to be a context-aware product that is going to be more as an assistant than a utility tool you carry with you. And that's a huge opportunity. Now we're moving from making products that help us solve puzzles to really having products that help us get through life and make us happier, make us more fulfilled in our lives. You know, the hierarchy of needs. You know, we solve physical needs, then we solve, cognitive needs, but now we need to move up to sort of the self-realization question, which is, can we actually solve, questions about love and passion and things like that? I mean, think about what's the price you put on that?
Yeah, maybe we can continue in this idea. If you look at the iPhone 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on, there's not so much space to improve radically, to make some revolution. Do you think that the next step is some accessories like glasses or things like these?
Well, you're right. I think that's the critical limit to a product, is that there are limits to how good it can get. And I think the iPhone pretty quickly reached some limits. I mean, the size issue, right? You can't make it much bigger and still use it with one hand. I hope so. Well, they can make it bigger, but the problem is it's no longer one-handed device. I think if it's defined one-handed, we had two-handed devices before the iPhone. We you know, a Nokia communicator, or even Microsoft's Windows-based with keyboard on it, and so on. So there were two-handed phones before, and Apple sort of refocused people on one hand, and now with Samsung Note, we're back to thinking about two hands. So it's possible we'll see a broadening of the portfolio to two-hand use. But more than that, I think it's more like the screen resolution itself has reached the limit. I mean, it's called Retina because it can't get any better. If anybody tries to sell you a 500 dpi screen, just forget it. You cannot see more than 300.
But you can pay for.
Yeah, if you know, like the megapixel race, you know, there's a point that becomes a marketing issue, not a usability issue. But so resolution has reached the limit of the human eye. Size has reached the limit of the human hand. Battery could get better, maybe, but usually we're within 24 hours of charging. Something. So, yeah, there are in memory. You know, remember when the iPod kept getting more and more storage? The iPod got to 128 gigs or something, and then the iPhone stopped growing. You know, I mean, the iPhone reached a certain number, and the iPad now is 128, but that's kind of already reaching probably beyond most users' needs. So there's limits to that, because not because we don't have stuff, but it's in the cloud now, you see. So you don't need it local so much. And the cloud is getting bigger and bigger all the time. But yeah, so there are definite limits. Now the question is, what I point out is that as everyone is racing to make a bigger and bigger screen, maybe the answer is to make a smaller screen, which is the idea of really super portability. And that may imply, because there was a time when phones were getting smaller. Remember those times, right, when you could have a really tiny cell phone, like Nokia made some really nice ones. And now phones are getting bigger, and now suddenly that's fashionable. But I think it's possible we may see a reversal there, and then we'll see more ubiquitous, again, while preserving the richness of experience, which is the tricky part. And maybe we'll have multiple devices. I don't know. There's that whole story about, really, are you going to carry more than one thing? But there is a limit. There is a limit.
Okay, so you expect smaller device, maybe connected via Bluetooth or something like that?
I don't say.
Maybe measuring.
I wouldn't say. I don't put myself in the position of making predictions like that, but I think that is an opportunity. I don't know if it makes sense because of other constraints that I'm not aware of. But yeah, there's definitely an opportunity to zig where everybody's zagging, right? There's that movement away from the prevailing wisdom that usually creates opportunity. So yeah, I think pervasive computing, of course, Google is going with the glasses thing, and that's interesting, but there are questions about that. There are constraints to that as well. Do you want to really change how you look, you know, and be forced to look that way all the time? That's a tough sell, I think, for a lot of people. Watches are another thing. If they do go to a watch model, I mean, there are limits to what if you wash your hands and you splash water on your super cool iPhone watch, or you know, that's much of a more vulnerable place because you can walk around and smack it into a wall or something. So there's questions about ruggedness there. You know, how many of people who buy these watches make them like waterproof to 100 meters? How many do go down 100 meters? But so yeah, no, there's a lot of engineering issues around these things. But I would say that there's definitely an opportunity because fundamentally microprocessors will end up more in more places, right? And microprocessors and communications will pervade into new contexts. And I don't know where they're going to end up. You know, maybe in our clothes, maybe in our eyes, and so on. But they'll move smaller and smaller places.
Yeah, it's maybe complicated to make a prediction for a long time. Can you try something for this year? What do you expect?
I really, you know, we haven't talked about this, but I really think that the TV space has been simmering for a long time. You can't Yeah, a lot of people have made calls in that area and have gotten burned. Mostly because they made specific calls. They said it's going to happen this year, or it's going to happen this quarter. And when that doesn't happen, everybody laughs at them, and it's like the cry wolf. But I sense, and I've heard a lot of the comments from Apple directly that indicate that they're very interested in this. I mean, that's what they tell us. We are very interested in this. We feel we can make a contribution in this. If we look at the situation, we see that it's very backwards, therefore implying that it could be moved forward. So when they say these things, it's clear they're working on it. They say things like, it's a hobby for us. It's been a hobby for 5 years. They say we keep pulling on the string and seeing where it leads. You can just take all the comments that Tim Cook has ever made about Apple TV, and you put them together, and there's a clear pattern that they're working on something. And then, of course, there's the book by Walter Isaacson, where Steve Jobs says that absolutely we've cracked the problem. So you know something's been cooking for a long time. Something was cooking a long time for the iPad, too. It took from 2001 till 2010 for it to finally ship. And they've told us that's how long it took. So we don't know how long they've been working on Apple TV, and I think it's at least probably 6-7 years. What the trigger for me, the tipping point will be when they're going to put an apps on it. I think there are sort of apps there now, but they're really not through an SDK that anyone can write to. And whenever we see real apps or an SDK, I think that's when I would suddenly ring the alarm and saying, okay, the world is about to change, because when app developers will finally be welcomed onto a TV set, although they are there with Google somewhat, but I'm saying that the Apple Catalyst will be working there. Then yeah, there's I don't want to be pinned to a date, but I think that the TV opportunity is about as ripe as it can get. Okay, it's really close now, and that will change a lot of things.
Okay, sounds like makes sense. What do you think about the future of the iPad and Mac? You know, because Mac doesn't seem to be that important like 10 years ago, right? So do you think that iPad will be the mass product and the Mac will, go down?
Well, the thing to look at, so I always thought the iPad is a disruptive product to the computer in general, but what you have to observe is what can get better about it. So let's see the pattern of where iPad has gone from beginning to now. So it's only been, 3 years or so. 3 years in April, I think. So it's gotten thinner, it's gotten faster, it's gotten more memory a little bit, it's gotten a better screen, and then it's also got smaller in one version. So a lot of things happen in 3 years, and it seems to be on a 6-month cycle, far faster than the iPhone. Yeah. And so what I'm asking myself is, once I did an analysis where I compared the specs of the iPad to the specs of a Mac, but the Mac was 3 years older or 4 years older, and they stack up pretty well. In fact, the iPad was more of a computer than a MacBook of 4 years earlier. And no one even... See, a lot of people, when I wrote that, a lot of people said, that, well, the iPad is not a real computer. But no one, when shown a 4-year-old MacBook, would say, well, that's not a real computer. Well, I just proved that that device has better specs, if what you talk about is specs. It had better screen, better memory. It was faster, with all these good things about it. So now you can see the trajectory on the CPU and all these other parameters that the iPad today is a great computer. What I'm looking for next, though, is some kind of a leap. Maybe not leap is not the right word, but incremental improvement in the OS that may bring a bit more of the desktop power to it. I'm not sure if they wouldn't compromise like Microsoft would. I think that they would try to make it so that, okay, here's my example. It would be that if iWork, the suite of apps, would become so cool that you can use it on the iPad alone. And it's one of these things that, again, nobody talks about. But iWork has not been improved for 4 years almost on the desktop. But they've been releasing updates on the iPad. So it's as if the whole work effort of the productivity guys at Apple is focused on the iPad right now. So I'm hoping to see a package of software in the iPad, not necessarily in the OS, but in this core apps, core applications. And of course, if Microsoft brings Office as well, then suddenly things will change because people will no longer talk about, well, I can't use it for productivity. Look, dock a keyboard to it, you're good to go, you know, and you can use all the Office apps on it and nobody will complain anymore about that. Everybody will forget the argument. And that's when I think, again, we'll have another move in that direction where the Mac or PC become less relevant. And so it happens so slowly you almost don't notice it, but it is happening, and all you have to do is go back and just connect the dots.
Perfect. Thank you, Horace.
That was amazing. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming to Prague. Actually.
Oh, hey, I love it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.